Hey, y'all, we're at the top of the hour and looks like we're recording. Steph, have you already verbalized the intro?
Yes, you're good to go.
Awesome. Thanks all for joining the April 2021 all remote group conversation. A lot has happened since the last one. I'm excited to see you all here. The agenda is attached in the calendar invite. Folks are welcome to take a look at the slides, which are embedded there, and begin to document your questions there in the agenda. You're also welcome to verbalize, and we can document retroactively. Looks like Mark has the first question. Do you want to verbalize?
You bet, Darren. Hey, so in your experience and the team's experience, what are the first three things you would advise a company to do when they're transitioning to async communications from their legacy, we have to get everyone together in the same conference room face to face?
Yeah, phenomenal question. We've gotten that a lot, but I want to say some context here. It's actually great that we're getting that question. So there's this global recognition that, hey, maybe we're doing this wrong or we're doing this too often. That opens up the conversation for GitLab to come in and say, oh, actually, let's help you look at it differently. So the first step would be read the GitLab handbook sections on async and meetings. And I think that those two combined get you 80, 90% of the way there. So much of this is a mental shift. Many people don't know what's possible to be done asynchronously because they've never worked in an environment where their entire team or company has put intentionality on doing it that way. So they've only seen snippets of it here or there. So we try to document that and say, read this first and then come back with questions. The second thing I would say is offer up a boring solution first. This can feel very daunting. I have a guide on the phases of remote adaptation, and the first one being skeuomorphism, and like we're doing whatever we were doing in the office, but now in a virtual environment. And then it's several phases later before you get to the intentionality and the asynchronous first mindset. And a lot of companies have this preconceived notion that they can go from zero to mastery in the blink of an eye, and that's usually not the case. So I say boring solution. Try to reduce your recurring meetings by 20 or 25% in a quarter, and then see what happens. Maybe just go through and just remove some of these meetings. When you look at them, you think, I haven't gotten a lot of value out of this. Try reducing them, removing them, and then it forces folks to get creative on what the alternatives could be. And I kind of like this ratio because it's drastic enough to force a change in behavior, but not so drastic that it upends the company. So that's number two. The third, for this to be a lasting change, you have to have absolute executive sponsorship. And so this means even the executives are modeling working async first. Now, for companies that are transitioning, they probably won't get all things transferred to async right away, but it is super critical for executives and senior leadership to do this if they expect others in the organization. Jessica or Betsy, anything to add on that?
I'd add a little bit. I would say that the first thing that people need to understand is that async really means fewer meetings. And so make sure that that's the core concept that people are coming from. If you think about the most synchronous experience that we have at work, that is people showing up to a meeting like we are now and having to be there at the same time, exchanging information. I was working with Portia recently we did a consultation on how to work async, and there was a C-level person in the call, and we started talking about meetings, and his take was, this is impossible because as soon as you cancel a meeting, another one will just show up on the calendar. And so that speaks to Darren's point about executive sponsorship. Like, you really have to get that core concept through to leadership and help people believe that it's possible.
Great, thank you both.
All right.
All right. Yeah, it looks like Josh has a second question. Go for it.
Yeah. Hi, Darren. Hi, Jessica and team. Thanks for hosting this. So I'm curious, I've heard that you all have implemented and piloted some async weeks within your team. It's something that we tried on the L&D team as well. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the benefit. How has it gone? And do you think this is something we could try to apply organization-wide?
This was Jessica's idea. I would love for Jessica and Betsy to comment if they want to. If not, I'm happy to take it.
I'll start, and then I would love to hear from you as well, Darren and Betsy. But I will say that it is like a breath of fresh air. It's so wonderful to just look at the week and say, wow, I have no meetings. I mean, imagine that feeling. It's truly wonderful, but it comes with some challenges. Not everyone is easily able to implement an entire async week. So when we think about rolling it out to the whole company, it may be difficult to do that in a way that's super inclusive and that everyone feels like they're a part of, and we don't want to create unequal experiences. So I would say so far it has been a very positive experience. And as far as logistics of spreading it wider, I'm not sure that we know what they would be yet.
Yeah, and I would just add, the 2 weeks ago when our team did it, it was my first async week, and it was, I mean, just kind of mind blowing how freeing it was to be able to have those long work blocks. And one of the things I've noticed that people bring up in reaction to that is, well, if I'm working with people outside of GitLab, how do I handle that? And I think like understanding that you still would, have a few meetings with people externally, and that's normal, but it's more like practicing that kind of forcing function to get you to think outside the box about figuring out when you can make, the internal GitLab meetings asynchronous instead of having to catch up on a call.
Yeah, the 2 points I'll add here is this can feel drastic if you've never done it before. So there's this initial inkling of, oh, this is actually more difficult. Let's just quickly revert back to the way we were doing it. But that kind of stamps out the innovation and creativity that could happen there. And so the thought being your second or third or fourth one will be way more efficient because you spend the first two just figuring out what are the workflow changes that need to happen? What are the expectations and cultural mindset shifts that need to happen? And it's, as to Jessica's point, it's freeing to be able to look at larger blocks of time and think, what does creativity look like in this? To Betsy's point on the external meetings, sometimes it's impossible. If I'm doing a media interview with a reporter that wants or needs to get on the phone, it is what it is. But what I've seen is that during Async Week, you feel a little bit more empowered to respond back to external parties and say, hey, here's this handbook link explaining what we're doing, this thing called Async Weeks. Do you want to experiment with that? Would you appreciate that? Would you be willing to try that? And I've been surprised at how many people are amenable to that. We even had a really complicated one last week that I thought for sure would require a meeting. And turns out the other party said, hey, do you think we could solve this asynchronously? And I did a bit of a dance to think that maybe this is spreading just a bit. But feel empowered to mention it to other people. If you give them the opportunity to do things in a different way, you never know. It could help their day as well if they're inundated with meetings.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, so maybe it's a team by team basis, and managers can seek to implement that on their own team and test it out and pilot it. So cool.
Yeah, I would say do that. It's a two-way door. I mean, this is the quintessential two-way door. We laid out Async Weeks for the entire calendar year 2021 with the expectation that if the first two are a complete disaster, we can just walk back through the door, learn something, and walk through another door. So try to remind people that it is a two-way door. It's a learning process, even if you find out you don't love to work that way.
Got it. Thanks, Darren. John, I think you're next.
Thanks. So I've seen, I follow you on Twitter, Darren, and I'm part of the remote channel on Slack, and I've seen a lot of discussion around this head of remote role, and you mentioned it in slide 17. I'm just curious, for these companies that are now hiring for this role, does there seem to be like a similar KPI that people are targeting, or maybe a reporting structure like that could be in marketing, like we do at GitLab, or maybe it would be in a people team at another organization? I'm just curious, does there seem to be like kind of some similarities between how companies are approaching that role, or is it unique depending on the needs of the company that's doing the hiring?
Great question. There's one common thread, which I'll mention in a minute, but organizationally, I've seen the full gamut. Dropbox actually has this in their design department because they look at organizational design through a similar lens as product design, and they feel like they can get more buy-in if they frame it as that. We are changing design, organizational design, which I think is wise. Some organizations are planting this within real estate, the CFO organization, because they have tons of real estate and they're trying to figure out what to do with it, how to repurpose it, and what life looks like when you're not using all of it. A lot of companies are putting this in the people organization. They see change management as the number one objective. They recognize that there will be a lot of headwinds, a lot of apathy, maybe a lot of people who aren't going to be on board with what the new culture looks like. And so they're trying to focus on that. And similar to GitLab, I've seen this placed in communications and marketing, because some orgs realize that telling the story of why we are evolving our workforce is just as important, if not more important, than the tactical nature of the change management itself. So the TLDR there is, each organization is looking at this from, where is our weakest spot? Where is the hole that we need to fill first, knowing that this will be a long iterative journey, and they're focusing this dedicated leader on what they see for their org is the foundational piece for everything to work. Now, the common thread, no matter where this role lands, everyone that I'm speaking with sees it as an opportunity to create more equitability and inclusivity across their workforce. So even if it's in the CFO organization, they're trying to frame this up as, how can we change our workflows or the way we think about people and talk about people, so that there's not an A team and a B team, or there's as little difference between the A team and B team as possible in the instance of hybrid organizations. And that's encouraging. It is encouraging to see leaders putting inclusivity at the forefront. For decades, remoters have been on the B team, and there's been very little thought given to that. And COVID has kind of awoken the minds of leaders that, oh, actually, this is significant, and we should care about those who are in satellite offices or remote by default, or on a different floor than the CEO. So that's been the common thread between all of those.
I think the next one is me. So actually very related to that last part of your conversation, which is, I'll throw the controversy out there to get started. I don't think most executives actually care about that, and they're ready to get back into the office and get the people back around them. But I may be wrong about that. I'm throwing it out there to start a conversation more than anything. So there've been a number of conversations in eGroup about the next phase of all remote kind of messaging and thinking, specifically around employee branding and recruiting. We have our new head of recruiting that started this week, Rob. I don't think he's on today, but I'm sure he'll have, he and I had an interesting conversation about this. And I'm wondering if you think there's an opportunity to begin to paint a sharper contrast between what good looks like relative to remote, because I think there's going to be a reckoning of sorts coming as half the company goes back into the office, or 2/3 does, and some people don't want to. And I think you're going to see careers stall. You're going to see employee experience get worse instead of better, potentially. You're going to see meeting experience get worse instead of better, as people fumble around trying to say that they're having a remote experience, but they're still going to be in a conference room. Can we paint a starker picture of what good looks like with GitLab by being a little more controversial? Just wanted to sort of throw that out there and get your thoughts on that. Both you and Jessica would love to hear, and Betsy.
I see Jessica nodding. You want to go?
Yeah, I have a super positive response to this line of questioning. I'm thrilled to see it. I mean, I know it's going to be very challenging, but I think this is exactly the question to be asking right now. And it's great. We actually have a meeting later today. We're going to sit down with legal and with comms, and we're going to start talking about our talking points for the upcoming period. So it's a great time to start incorporating this sort of thinking. I definitely agree. You know, as we're evangelizing remote work, that doesn't just mean telling only the positive side of things. I think we do have to dig into the challenges and to differentiate by showing what it means to do it well and the risks of doing it poorly. And of course, we have to do that carefully, but I do think that it's very important to differentiate GitLab as a brand and as a company, but also to have an honest conversation that resonates with people, because it sounds like we're telling the truth. So I think that it's very important to take this into account. And I love that the eGroup is thinking about this as well.
Love that. Thank you. Anybody else on the team want to comment on that? Because interesting topic.
I would also add that this is something, from the talent brand side, we used to see, like, even at the very beginning of the pandemic, was like, we were starting to notice that, okay, all of these companies are forced remote right now. So how do we differentiate the experience at GitLab from that? And it was tricky during the pandemic because there's so many other factors at play. But I think now we're in a place where we can be much more intentional about that message and knowing a little bit more where the world is going to be coming out of this, and being able to actually, address that in a more specific way going forward.
Yeah, I've told a lot of leaders that Glassdoor is going to be their ultimate litmus test. If they decide to allow remote coming out of this, your reviews will likely trend one way. If you support and enable remote work, it's going to go another way. And so I've tried to hone their attention on that.
Have we talked to Glassdoor about maybe having a category of ratings around remote work? Like, willingness / quality of remote work experience?
We had talked to Glassdoor about a number of things that pre-pandemic, they were very not, geared towards remote companies. So I think that was something to get on their radar early on. And even just, with awards and other things like that, being able to say that we're remote versus based in a certain city, it's a struggle that we've had on a lot of those platforms. But I do think Glassdoor is trending in that direction now. So that'd be a great thing for us to kind of specifically ask of them.
I would even go so far as to say, if we went to them and said, hey, we'll do a GitLab remote quality index with you, that would be awesome. It would be huge. Quality of remote work live sponsored by GitLab and Glassdoor would be really cool. Might not make us many friends though. I'm not sure.
We're not in the friends business, so that's okay.
I'll document that.
Well, don't put it on our partnerships page.
Okay, so for the next question, I had introduced this. So I didn't think it was appropriate to put this into our slide deck because it was had a press embargo going, but I think it's safe to announce that in 45 minutes, we're releasing our updated remote playbook. And I would love for Betsy to talk about it because this is Betsy's first big project on the team.
Absolutely. So this is really exciting. I think a lot of you have probably seen last year, we released this playbook really right at the start of the pandemic. And so that playbook was sort of geared around how do companies, make a quick switch and try to put some things in place that will help their teams operate better in a remote way in sort of a quick start fashion. And so the new playbook is really geared around kind of looking towards the future and figuring out how companies can now, plan for what the future of work is going to look like for their teams. And it's condensing all of the great knowledge that is in GitLab's Guide to Remote Work, which is more than 50 guides now. And so it condenses it all into one resource for companies or leaders looking to make that switch this year. So it's cool because we've sort of done a deeper dive in this version with things like hybrid remote and the downfalls of that, but also if your team is going hybrid remote, here are the things you want to keep in mind. So I think it's a great sort of balance between sharing our knowledge and also making sure that it's approachable for many different types of teams on that remote work continuum. So we're releasing it today, so you'll see a lot more coming out about it soon, and would love for you to share it yourself.
I think I'm up next. Are we marketing the handbook as a tool for having a remote company? And to me, it seems like a really key asset to succeeding with a remote company. And it's also a great entry point for many to use GitLab.
Awesome question, Lauren. I do want to take the opportunity to thank Betsy times 100 for all of the work on the remote playbook refresh. She's very humble in delivering that message, but it is really good. And our design team has made it really good. So I'm very proud of that iteration. So to this question specifically, yes, it's essential. When I tell people, like, what are the TLDR, the things you can't miss? I say you have to have a company handbook. You have to start building organized documentation into the culture. Otherwise, all of the work you do in building remote muscle and remote fluency could just go out the window, or it essentially is if you're building it in real time and not documenting that. So this is a tricky one where organizations who already use GitLab, it might not be a huge stretch to use GitLab to build their handbook, but to some degree, it's like using a sledgehammer when you need just a regular hammer. It's a bit overwhelming. So we have a page on Handbook First documentation that paints the picture of why it's important from an organizational standpoint. And we do suggest GitLab as a potential solution for that. The key thing that I share with people on why using GitLab for Handbook makes a lot of sense is the merge request functionality, where you assign a code owner, a maintainer to a certain page, and then anyone can contribute a proposal to make it different or better. And then there is this documented approval loop so that you always know what came and what went and what time did that. I am seeing some tools pop up on the market that are trying to implement that Git-like functionality into it. But I generally, it's interesting, depends on where you start, right? For a lot of these companies who've never documented anything, it's like, well, maybe just start a wiki, just start writing something down. It's like almost pains me to say that, but we, to some degree, have to meet people where they are, and not everyone is ready for the PhD level delivery of a handbook.
Yeah, I also added a comment in there just on, the handbook. We launched GitLab Learn, which is our learning experience platform, to the community today. And I think it would be great if, our team and the all remote team can partner with you all to build more certifications and courses that really kind of breaks up the handbook. Darren, I did that in the Bias for Async course to make it a little bit more digestible, and that folks can actually get certified in how to build an all remote company, along with the Coursera course and all the other resources we have. But just an idea.
Love that. And Lauren, one other thing I want to say here, kind of back up a little bit. Before leaders can really wrap their heads around a tool to work Handbook First, there is this cultural shift that has to happen, and an acknowledgement from the top that we will go slower to go faster. Many people think about their lives and their work days in 30-minute chunks. So they say, is doing X instead of writing something down faster? Well, of course, in a 30-minute span, it probably is, but they fail to see the compounding interest associated with that. If you write something down today, in a week or a month or a year, you'll have outsized benefits, huge amounts of efficiency, an almost incalculable amount of interruptions and pings asking you for something that you won't have because you wrote things down at the beginning. That mental shift is essential before the tool ever comes into play. And so the biggest challenge right now is getting leaders to understand that, because they've never worked in that way. And in many cases, going slow to go fast, just the going slow part will drive them crazy. It just feels like it's less efficient because they don't see the bigger picture. So trying to break that down is step one when I'm having conversations with people who are frantically trying to transition to remote. Looks like Ryan has the next question.
Hey, Darren, how's it going? Are there wins that we've had in the past 12 months? Right? Like, this is kind of like people were on Ultimate and they tried it out. Now some people are going back when I think about it from like a sales perspective. But are there companies that were like, we helped them transition, now they're ready to be all remote versus going back to hybrid?
Yeah, awesome question. So I linked Inspired by GitLab page. This page has actually been around for a while, but the amount of new companies added to it in the last 12 months is crazy. And it is amazing. And I love that we paint it as Inspired by GitLab, because we're helping companies out in a variety of different ways. There have been a few major firms that have been okay publicly stating that we've helped them architect their head of remote job description, or help them vet what is needed first. What step goes first. Jessica has some amazing stats on how many times the remote playbook has been downloaded. I want to say it's over 100,000 in the last year. And so to some degree, that makes me think GitLab's fingerprints are all over the world's remote transformation, even in instances where we don't know it. A lot of these companies won't admit it publicly. They're just downloading it from our site and then implementing parts of it. But what we're hearing kind of behind the grapevine, so to speak, is that it's been really impactful. But that list, that Inspired by GitLab link, is where I would start. And there actually may be some sales leaders on the call that would want to chime in. We've certainly done some conversations with existing GitLab clients on transitioning to remote, and overall the response and feedback has been really positive.
Thank you.
Cool. Looks like we are at time. Happy to keep the conversation going asynchronously if anybody wants to add more questions. If not, thanks all for joining. It's been a fun group conversation. Absolutely. Thanks, Zach. Thanks all for doing this. Keep the questions coming. And thank you all for accelerating what we do at All Remote. If it's just this tiny team trying to change the world, it's really, really hard. So we really appreciate everybody at GitLab being an advocate for this. And we're going to try to enable all of you to do that with even more rigor in the quarter going forward. Thanks all. Take care.